Dungeons & Dragons will never be the same again. Wizards of the Coast have finally done it. After years and years of planning, their nefarious scheme has finally come to fruition. Chris Cox, CEO of Hasbro and resident Dark Lord, has finally achieved his devilish desires, determining the destiny of Dungeons & Dragons. And I bet that most role players and gamers out there didn't even notice. That's how good they are these days. It has passed most of the D&D community by, like a Trojan horse carrying so many dangerous little Greeks. But nevertheless, this was one of the most momentous weeks in Dungeons & Dragons history. One that will be looked back on as the moment where everything really did for real change. And I'm not sure there's any hope of us going back. And this wasn't a 1D&D update. Those are still ticking along nicely right now. I think they're still trying to figure out how druids work. It wasn't a new campaign or settings book. It wasn't even some new digital item that can be bought on D&D Beyond. It was actually extremely innocuous, innocent even. Very minor to most people's eye. But stick with me on this one, because if you've been following Wizards of the Coast business movements, as I have been, then it was also pretty transformative. So this week, Wizards released a number of monster stat blocks for free, exclusively available on the D&D Beyond platform, of course, so don't forget to create your online account to pick them up. All for the hyped new characters of the upcoming movie Honor Among Thieves. This is the movie set in the IP of Dungeons & Dragons TM. I can't really say that it's set in the world of Dungeons & Dragons because, well, Dungeons & Dragons doesn't quite have a set of world. But nevertheless, you too can have the cool cats from the latest Dungeons & Dragons movie in your game. We have various characters laid out in D&D Beyond. They have an AC, hit point stats, special abilities, challenge ratings, essentially everything that any standard monster in the monster manual needs in order to be used in a D&D adventure. Although, word of warning here, I suggest not looking at their abilities because some of them seem to actually spoil moments of the movie. I haven't seen the movie, but reading over the abilities that some of these characters have, there are some that really heavily imply certain dramatic moments taking place. For example, one of the characters has a special trait that gives them a bonus for betraying allies, which, yeah, I'm expecting a betrayal from that character now in the D&D movie is my point. It's probably best to wait until you actually watch the movie before reading these if you want to stay away from spoilers. Bonus though, if you watch the movie and don't like it at all, then you can officially put the stars of that movie into your game so that your players can beat them with sticks. Hello, Hugh Grant. Goodbye, Hugh Grant. This is for Notting Hill! 4 weddings this, you Also, the characters are really clunky, and they don't even seem to work in the rules of Dungeons & Dragons. See, these characters are based on a movie that consists of characters based on a class from a game. It's like 3 times removed. We're talking Habsburg level here. And when the writers of Honor Among Thieves were actually writing the script to that movie, they had to make a lot of concessions in order to have epic moments on the screen. Like the famous case of a druid transforming into an owlbear in the trailer. That had a lot of people upset.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
So now that we have that druid character being translated into Dungeons & Dragons the game, well, they just inexplicably have the ability to transform into an owlbear, unlike any other druid in the game. Yeah, I guess that's one way to resolve it. There's also Zank, the paladin. He wields a weapon called a dagger sword, which is a magic weapon that transforms from dagger to short sword to long sword. And at first, it seemed to me like one of the coolest magic weapons ever, until I kind of realized he's a paladin and would have absolutely zero desire to ever wield a dagger. So actually, it's kind of trash for him. More vendor fodder, really. I'd rather have a +1 longsword, please. But okay. Optimizing these characters is not why I'm here today. Maybe some other video if you want that, let me know in the comments below. But we're back on track. What is the big deal with characters from a D&D movie being made into D&D monster stat blocks for the game? Who cares? This is pretty easy. It's pretty obvious. It's pretty simple cross-promotional marketing gimmicks from Wizards of the Coast, right? Well, As someone who has been following Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast business now for a little bit of a time, a little bit of a stalker, it's actually a lot more significant than that. This is in actuality the Rubicon, and it has been crossed, people. In the announcement video for these stat blocks, Chris Perkins, D&D game designer, mentions that when the design team originally had the idea of making the D&D movie characters into stat blocks, a business team at Wizards had already made them. Except instead of making the movie characters into NPC stat blocks like the design team wanted to do, the Wizards business team had translated the movie stars into character sheets.
The first thing that my team did was we interfaced with another team at Wizards, the franchise team, who had already gone through the exercise of creating character sheets.
Yes, that is correct. It turns out that the terrifyingly named franchise team at Wizards had already created the characters in the game before the D&D designers did. And I do see where they're coming from. There is a D&D movie, so obviously as a member of the franchise team, it's time to begin some cross-media franchising. But this should also be a hint to players as to where Wizards' future focus lies. These character stat blocks are not part of a self-contained Honor Among Thieves tie-in supplement book. Instead, they're designed explicitly to interact with your home D&D campaign. That's actually pretty radical, and has not really been done much in Dungeons & Dragons. We never saw Jeremy Irons get statted out for 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, simply appearing in the monster manual, expecting you to throw him in to keep on the borderlands when things get a little bit screwy. I mean, that would have made for quite a twist though, I'm not gonna lie. This time though, it's different because this represents a shifting attitude from Hasbro Wizards towards Dungeons & Dragons as a game. Even Keys from the Vault, the latest adventure released by Wizards and designed to be a general series of heist scenarios for your game, has been subtly tied into the new movie. And it's not in a particularly obvious way, but the adventure takes place in locations that also appear in Honor Among Thieves. It's a really small connection, and you wouldn't bat an eye at it if you didn't know. But to me, it looks like writing on the wall that this is the formulation of a wider IP with the same worlds and landscapes coming up over and over and over again because it's easier to franchise. Maybe Barry the Beholder might show up in a TV show and then become a toy sold by Hasbro and then start appearing in future Dungeons & Dragons supplements and board games. That goes part and parcel with Hasbro transforming D&D into a major brand. But Hasbro aren't going to stop there. Oh no. These new movie stat blocks are just the first step in the fundamental and radical reimagining of Dungeons & Dragons, not as a game, but as a play system. D&D is destined to become a franchise engine, a money machine. And this isn't far-fetched. We're already used to some of it. We've seen franchise supplement books like the Rick and Morty Adventure or the Stranger Things starter set, or more infamously, the old TSR Indiana Jones RPG. But those were designed to be self-contained experiences and not really interact with the wider D&D multiverse that connects every single campaign setting. A multiverse that I warn most players are just hearing about right this very moment. Yeah, it exists. It always has done. That's the old way of doing things though. That's how TSR did it. That is going to change. When we think about the new cross-IP transmedia platform future of Dungeons & Dragons, we should be looking at how Wizards have treated their other major product line, the card game Magic the Gathering. For a while now, Wizards have been pushing a concept in that game called Universes Beyond. This is a series of collaborations with other corporations that puts other IPs and franchise characters and settings onto Magic cards. The first was a Warhammer 40k card set, and next we're going to be getting Lord of the Rings cards. There's even a Doctor Who card set and a Walking Dead card set too. All extremely appropriate settings for a fantasy card game, I'm sure you'll agree. And importantly, these sets of cards are not designed to simply be played as their own self-contained boxed experience. experience. Rather, they are added to the existing Magic the Gathering card pool. In other words, I could have a deck of cards made up of a combination of Aragorn, Frodo, Doctor Who, and Abaddon the Despoiler from Warhammer 40k, and then just throw on top of that a bunch of random Magic the Gathering cards from who cares? And it would be totally legal because these are brands that have been shoved into the Magic the Gathering ecosystem and platform. And we're going to see that soon in Dungeons and Dragons too. And this is not wild speculation, by the way. I'm not inferring this from a few new stat blocks and a campaign supplement released on the D&D Beyond. I'm listening to what the Dark Lord himself says, Chris Cox. In April of last year, he surmised, there's a lot of international growth vectors we can do. There's a lot of new exclusive content we could do. You know, we've talked a lot about universes beyond in Magic, which is this concept of thinking about Magic as a play system and bringing in outside brands or outside IP into that play system. We see potential for that with D&D as well, and we think that D&D Beyond can be a primary hub for that. Yeah, where were these released? D&D Beyond? Woo! And with the release of these new movie tie-in characters on D&D Beyond, and an adventure that sort of is and isn't in the movie version of Icewind Dale, it seems that D&D is finally being set up to become what Chris Cox wants it to be. A play system for tie-ins, a platform that IPs and brands can get access to. And perhaps a little bit worryingly for players, this strategy is proven to work. It has already been successfully trialed in Dungeons and Dragons. We've already gotten books like the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, for example. This brought the Magic the Gathering setting into the D&D multiverse, and also happened to expose the D&D audience to the Magic the Gathering setting, potentially getting them interested in the much more heavily monetized Magic the Gathering game. Those books are looking a lot more predatory now that we know what the actual heads of Hasbro think about D&D players, don't they? They laughed at me, they mocked me, and while I am sure that there will be those who applaud the possibility of playing their favorite franchises in D&D in the future, I would caution that maybe it's not that great for the integrity of the game to have the franchise team drooling over the idea that they can get Batman Ninja to show up in a campaign, because that means that Batman fans will buy the next One D&D Adventure DLC and cosmetic package. And not only because Batman Ninja is potentially one of the greatest sins ever committed by man, but also because D&D is a window into another world, an excuse to get around a table and have fun, to put on silly accents and pretend to kill damsels and rescue dragons. Providing stat blocks for a couple of characters from the new D&D movie is in and of itself not a big deal, but it represents a future that is fundamentally different from how we, players, currently perceive Dungeons and Dragons. I can see a future where every new adventure is just another franchise collaboration with tie-in characters, premium themed monsters, and weird classes. It's not that wild. Why else would Hasbro have such a priapistic pursuit for changing the open gaming license for Dungeons and Dragons? In the future, if someone wanted to create a Last of Us D&D, they'll have to go through the Hasbro franchise team first. The OGL was walked back by Hasbro for 5th edition, sure, but not for One D&D, the exact system that these new movie characters have been made for. Yeah, they're not designed for 5th edition, they're One D&D, specifically. And I have no doubt that when we see the terms of the OGL for One D&D, that it will be incredibly restrictive as a result of this dark desire. Besides, putting pop culture references into D&D was always the purview of cheeky DMs.
Supreme executive power derives from a mandate from the masses.
It's not fair to take that away from us. I'm trying to push the mold in what we can get away with before verisimilitude is utterly destroyed. And ultimately, what we all have to be left with is this. If Wizards of the Coast really just wanted to do this, why didn't they just buy GURPS? But that's not even the worst part. There's so much more to Wizards' monetization strategy of D&D, which I talk about here. And if you like this content, please check out my Patreon. You can support it over on patreon.com/discourse miniatures. And a huge thanks to Sonic Bread, Crypto Kev, and John Smith, and to all my patrons. And I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye.